During the summer of 2022, we at the Arts, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Lab convened a series of conversations, bringing together a bunch of new people and a bunch of new voices and identities to address one big challenging topic. Really, we wanted to talk about alternative institutions and systems in the arts sector and their implications for equity, broadly conceived. We brought together researchers, practitioners, artists, arts administrators, a variety of different audiences. And we brought them together to have some in-person conversations as well as some online. And over the course of these conversations, the assembled people with their very diverse backgrounds and contexts engaged in some pretty difficult and very important conversations about how the field might progress. Conversations raised a great many questions. We asked questions like, how do we even know what we know? Which sounds a little bit philosophical, but we actually struggled quite a bit with moving beyond what are essentially firsthand accounts or secondhand accounts, go beyond the very prevalent anecdotal evidence that many of us can bring to the table and try to find more systematic evidence.
Hi, my name is Joanna Veronkovich, and I'm the co-director of the Arts, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Lab. I'm also faculty director of the Center for Cultural Affairs and associate professor at the O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs at Indiana University in Bloomington. What follows are some highlights of the events, the Workshop and Symposium on Innovating Institutions and Inequities in the Arts, so you can get an idea of exactly what took place.
Think about when it comes to the idea of not using terminology like underrepresented, or something that I think about whenever I'm speaking to clients or other research collaborators is, there were more, it's not about just the number of people that you have on the panel or maybe like the first, like marginalized individual that comes into a leadership position, because numbers don't change systemic inequity. Like there were more slaves than slave owners on the plantation. It's not about the numbers, right? It's about the power. So it's something that we try to make sure is deeply infused into, our thinking, especially when it comes about creating systemic change.
About art as cultural and social capital. I'm thinking about art as social contracting and what that is in terms of ownership and co-authorship. Generally, I was thinking about the specificity of attribution and what that means in particular, and coming that from an indigenous lens in particular. I was just at the museum earlier today and there was like unknown person in this painting or who did this painting like on the wall of this museum, right? So these are the things that I'm continually experiencing over and over again to the mascots here in the great state of Indiana, right, in statehood. I'm thinking about what are clear and concrete examples. Every good story has, specific examples, every good piece of art, because of its nuance to create change and to create that ripple effect, which I think is really important. So therefore, that brings me to my next point, which is context is everything. Everything, regardless of what you do or say or writing, context is everything. I think that, so I'm thinking about how to get scholars to write about process in terms of the art making with these brilliant artists who are in the room. Like, what does that mean to collaborate in that way? So that we can value and create a culture of valuing process over product in a capitalistic society. Some things I wanted to say was, what does it mean to think about research as a tool of resistance to fight against colonial inequity and erasure? How do the tensions between colonization, migration, and the diaspora merge into how your research is developed and accessed? How can we envision decolonial research and methods at a local, transnational, and intertribal level? What does it look like to challenge present-day colonial legacies and imagine a decolonial future?
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, and because that's the whole point I think I'm trying to go to is if we have knowledge and better knowledge about the ways in which people experience oppression, how can we change that into policy, right? To permit and to open up more spaces for creative justice.
The workshop on inequities in the arts that we held this past summer was a first for the Arts Entrepreneurship and Innovation Lab. It was the first time that we were back in person after the COVID-19 pandemic started. And it was also the first time that we brought artists and researchers into a room together at the Center for Cultural Affairs at a research workshop. So I would say being back in person was really invigorating, to say the least. Outside of the workshop, the group bonded really well. And I think most of us can say that we all made at least one friend over the course of those couple days. And that intimacy we formed really allowed us to create bridges between the artists and the researchers at the workshop. And I think, to be honest, the virtual audience felt much of the same thing because we had virtual attendees staying on for the entire 8-hour day, both days, and contributing to discussion. And some of these people were in Australia and Europe, so this was the middle of the night for some of them. So I think they felt that intimacy that we felt in the room as well. That bridging is something that the AEI Lab and the Center for Cultural Affairs is really intent on doing throughout its work. And this was really our first foray into bridging at a research workshop between two distinct populations. What was the impact? Well, it's hard to say because I do think that there will be some longer term impacts that we haven't seen yet. But on the short term side, I do think that both sides, both the artists and the researchers, got to see new perspectives. And when we're talking about a topic as personal as something like inequities in the arts, that's really critical to making progress. There are so many silos that exist in all of our worlds, professional and personal. So seeing outside of those worlds can sometimes be really hard. So for a workshop to be able to facilitate seeing outside of those silos, I think is really important, especially when we're thinking about how to make progress. I think the workshop and the symposium later on in that summer allowed some of us to see outside of our world. And even if they didn't agree with what others said who weren't in their silos, I think the exposure at the very least was influential on the work going forward. We have two research products coming out of this workshop. The first is a special issue at American Behavioral Scientist on inequities in the arts, and that's very much already in the works. We have a second, also an edited volume coming out that many of our workshop attendees are contributing to as well. And I'm proud of these products because they're evidence-based. On a topic as personal as inequities, that can be really hard to do, but it's also very important to do to stick to the evidence. The highlights of what we saw at the workshop were, I think, number one, the respect that everyone gave to one another in discussing such a topic that really hit close to home for so many of the attendees. And number two, that the perspectives were integrated into the research that we're producing in these products, but also these research studies are still staying true to their methods used to understand these topics based on evidence.
Resistance. Right now, even though we don't think about it this way, or many of us don't, like we're in the midst of the biggest labor movement of the last 50 or 70 years. And there are people who are in the bellies of these companies. You know, Amazon's really getting shat on today, but like people are dying working for Amazon. And Amazon Union was started by the big one in New York was started by an artist. Chris Smalls is a rapper and promoter. And so I'm optimistic because I'm looking at Starbucks people unionizing. I'm looking at people who are speaking out against progressive institutions like the New Yorker for inequitable editorial practices with regard to Black people and women. Everywhere you look, but it's incumbent on us as artists and thinkers and practitioners to connect the dots for everyone and to give them a clear pathway to plug into. But I think, you know, Google Walkout, those are artists who are making a lot of money, who refuse to participate in military industrial complex and developing technologies that are going to be sold to US government and surveillance technology and everything else.
Develop, practices of awareness or pattern recognition that can, help, especially emerging leaders in these spaces to not kind of fall into those pitfalls, like someone put in the chat, art washing or whitewashing, or things that you think you're doing one thing and you find out, oh, I've just been used to do something else.
We also ask questions about these new technologies coming online. Rather than take the new technologies as given or as generally a good thing, we needed to question whether or not these things are actually going to be our ally. Like many of our old institutions and systems, such as markets or government funding, these are tools. They're not necessarily inherently good or bad. The question is how we use them and what we can do with these tools and what we do with the tools. So when we talked about many of the new technologies and these online platforms and things that NFTs and things like this they're potentially really exciting, they're also potentially really scary. And it remains to be seen how we'll end up using them.
What we're seeing with blockchain technologies, and I'll just say digital communities generally, is we're back to actually having really, really close-knit communities in a way we haven't had in a very long time. Folks who are finding each other, they're mission aligned, they're able to work together with collectivity. So there's a different way of organizing online. With regard to the financial impact, I mean, what we're hearing right now is, again, like on two sides. One is everything's getting hacked and your crypto wallets are being stolen, people are losing billions of dollars. And then quietly, you have a lot of stories about Black and brown folks who are profiting on these platforms. The number of Black artists that I've worked with over the last 2 years who become millionaires, who quietly, right?
And along that line, we also asked a lot of questions about what are the new or alternative, maybe innovative models that are out there. What are some of these options? We raised quite often the prospects of going and doing a different approach, scrapping capitalism and doing something different, but articulating what that other thing is and being able to show how it actually would outcompete, perform better than our current sort of incumbent systems that have the benefits of really dominant positions. How are you going to outcompete it? How can these systems be shown to be superior to it in order to get, whether it's the creatives or the audiences or the funders or others, to jump on board and actually switch over to these new institutions? That remains to be seen. In many cases, these alternatives are not particularly well articulated, and the case for their superiority is at least one that still remains to be made to a large group of people in order to switch it to take over and become the dominant force.
When does something become popular and it's sort of sliding scale? Because if you think about street art, for most people who do street art, as Banksy does, it's a crime. They're a criminal. And certainly that's how this individual artist started out his career. But what makes him popular? Why is his work now physically being ripped out of buildings and sold for hundreds of thousands of pounds? Craft workers, their work is often such an important part of tradition and heritage and cultural preservation. And so much of that is intangible cultural heritage. And so the idea of, as Claire mentioned, what happens if we popularize that in some capacity? In some cases, we popularize craft to preserve it. But how does that change the way we, I don't know, appreciate it or understand it? Is that an issue? Why is Van Gogh now having such a renaissance of all these exhibitions? And it's like, you can buy a shower curtain with Starry Night on it. Why that? And why not some other artist from the same time period that did something similar?
And so I was thinking about, so one of the sort of lessons that comes from Amanda's work, Deb's work, your work, is the importance of specifying individuals and institutions, sort of flagging, here are the most central people, here are their names, here is how they're behaving.
And again, thinking about particularly the visual art world where, how should I put this? Having stronger claims tends to be more effective than kind of subtle, here is an issue between organizational rhetoric and, kind of numeric practice. Actually, I think you can make that, sort of stronger intervention. So this is the thing. I think the kind of like, we as academics and I guess kind of, campaigning or activists in this space get as far as kind of saying, this is a sham, it's a charade. And that sort of like means that we take institutions kind of seriously and say you failed. Actually, I think about stuff like, I don't know if you know Onomik Sahar's work on the film industry, and people like, again, these are all film industry people, Clive Nwonka to an extent, Sarita Malik as well. They kind of say, no, actually, the rhetoric is the practice.
This is Sarah, one of the artist fellows. Just made me think about like the necessity and the fact that, we as artists in these days like have to be entrepreneurs. We all have to be to a certain extent in order to survive. I think I can speak for myself when I say that, but that feels very, very true for me and members of the communities and circles that I run in. One of the questions I wrote down though was, I was wondering about how you classify entrepreneurial, tweets or posts in the first place, because one of the things that I think about, I don't really engage with Twitter either, and I'm not great with social media, which I count perhaps as a blessing and a curse in today's world. But I think about how all of the posts are how the artist's image, like somebody might not be interested in listening to my music, but then I post something about, so what I cooked for dinner last night, and then they become interested in my music, so you might not see that post about me cooking this like really delicious, meal as an entrepreneurial post or tweet or whatever, but it is, every part of who I am as a person in this day and age, like becomes relevant in the entrepreneurial, development of my creative space and identity, and how I share it with the world. So it's really like trippy and strange and difficult to classify that.
Good on you. And in all honesty, I hope this keynote address finds you well. I hope this keynote finds you well and planning to start like 7 podcasts. I hope this keynote finds you with opinions on the media reflective of the moment, such as reservation dogs. How can those of us who hold structural and situational power, like me, but more importantly, like you, artists, managers, administrators, how can you wield your privilege to redirect attention, cash, healthcare, access to abortions, and power to those who are made to fall out of the system? Look, we can't just turn off capitalism. We can't divorce ourselves from our implication in military industrial research or hegemonic technologies. Our protests and resistance are always already co-opted by that which we seek to dismantle. That's just the weather these days. But if we're already implicated, what can we do with that implication? How can those of us who hold structural and situational power, like me, but more importantly, like you, artists, managers, administrators, how can you wield your privilege to redirect attention, cash, healthcare, access to abortions, and power to those who are made to fall out of the system? Now, the play in the system is infuriating to read because I so badly want a surgical option for surveillance capitalism. But maybe what it means to do the work right now is to do what we can, not what we want.
The rationale for the study, cultural inequity based on a colonized and white supremacist framing of artistic excellence. And so when we say white supremacist, we aren't necessarily talking about tiki torches and the KKK. I just want to, kind of unpack white supremacy for you. Okun and Jones in 2001 articulated some characteristics of white supremacy culture. And Okun actually really updated that, that rendering last year to talk about the ways in which white supremacy culture creates these actions and behaviors that are meant to really annihilate people of the global majority, but they also harm white people as well. And so when I was reading the paper, what kept coming up for me, I kept seeing examples of those actions and behaviors. For example, worship of the written word, right? Like this idea that if it's not written down, it's not of value, it's not important. This binary way of thinking, either or, one right way to do something. And so, it led me to ask this question: has historic and continuous cultural inequity led to a racial wealth gap for cultural organizations by and for people of the global majority in the US? That after reading this paper, that was the first time I asked that question. I had never thought that question before, so that was a benefit of reading the question, or reading the paper. So then the research questions in the paper, other than assessment of artistic merit, the most common use of artistic excellence in granting processes, are there other ways the phrase has impacted the grant-making process? What role does language and applicant and panelist materials play in replicating inequities? And how do applicant and panelist engagement and training replicate inequities? And can engagement and training, or can government agencies disrupt and dismantle longstanding inequities while operating as a governmental agency? So that's another thing I thought that is interesting about the paper, as it also connects to the previous paper, is that we're looking at state arts agencies which have this governmental component to them. And so it's like, one piece of the funding pie that how much work can we really do to change it? Private foundations, they have different criteria when they're assessing if someone is worthy of funding. Individuals do the same thing. And so this idea that a governmental agency is grappling with this issue, I thought, was very well represented throughout this paper. Methodological consideration for the authors is what method helped you to answer the research questions? And would organizing the conclusions as lesson learned or takeaways.
Non-participation isn't an option. You can't not use the internet. You can't not be tracked by Google. You can't not need money. You don't have a choice but to participate. Your implication and co-optation are guaranteed. But maybe the platform capitalist umbilicis that governs your world also makes resistance possible. To paraphrase spoilers from such films as The Babadook, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Home Alone, maybe it's not so much that you're stuck with them as they're stuck with you. So I ask each of the 4 people who actually watched to the end of this keynote. Hi, Dad. Hi, Mom. I love you. I hope this finds you making and holding space for others and dedicating yourself to envisioning enacting, and swimming out towards worlds other than the one we currently inhabit. And not other worlds like Mars. Thank you, Elon Musk. It's a metaphor, dude. Mars can't save us, you Olympic asshole. I'm talking about a more just world here and now on this non-metaphorical planet. I hope you're reading up on your Octavia Butler, your Simone Brown, your Ruha Benjamin, and your Sasha Costanza Shock. Because what comes next in this fakakta country is no secret. And because I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. I sincerely hope you're mad too, and ready to do something about it. Well,
So this was not our normal kind of gathering and conversation. It was an eclectic group of people brought together to discuss some sensitive and difficult topics. It was both challenging and uncomfortable, but also very rewarding and sometimes rather inspiring. There was a lot of stress and anxiety and a good deal of apprehension. We were, after all, talking about sensitive topics, and there was a good deal of confusion, especially in the beginning, as people were coming in, speaking different languages, coming from different contexts and bringing different perspectives. And it was all happening at a time where there was a good deal of challenges, a very challenging social time. We weren't quite sure where we were going to go next in society. We still aren't. In a lot of ways, at its heart, this project was about making new acquaintances, bursting out of our bubbles, breaking down silos, and making some new dance partners. And then we realized there's a lot of value in getting together in person and in real time and getting to know these other people as people. We put ourselves out there in some uncomfortable spaces. We raised some important issues, we had some conversations, and I think we made some genuine headway on them. This was an important step, an important bit of progress, and I hope that you enjoyed hearing some snippets of those conversations and hearing some of the insights that were raised.
I want to conclude with one term that we didn't really think about too much in our theme was what the term of innovation. And I want to look at everything that we've done in the past 2 days as an innovation, because innovation is not like who was it that mentioned that you talked about the term of an innovation and yes, it's not. Innovation is not about creating something better. Innovation is actually just about creation. And what we did these past 2 days, and even before these past 2 days, has all been about just creating. And so if we think about this event and this program as starting that process of innovation and of creating, then we can think about what might come next and what lies ahead. And I see a number of avenues that have been discussed already today. The ones that we've already sort of identified are the publications that will come out of this, right? We will all continue to work on the research. These are still moldable pieces of clay that are in no way finished. And we made that a point for this workshop to say, this is as drafty as draft can get, and come and talk about it. So let's continue to mold those into what becomes these eventual publications. We also have this next step of what our fellows are working on and what comes next with seeding this really important, I did it too. So with seeding this very important conversation and thinking about the change and future creation. And that's like, I want to leave it there because it's not done, but it is all about innovation in various different ways. And I think we've done, like, honestly, exceeded my expectations in the last 2 days about what we've created as a group together. So with that, I just want to say thank you, all, and give each other a round of applause. all in all, I would say the workshop and the symposium were a really great success. And I would say that they're also a model for us at the AEI Lab and the Center for Cultural Affairs in going forward for how to achieve this type of bridging that took place between the populations, but also sticking to examining topics based on evidence. And it also provided us with insights for how to do this the next time around.